Imagine getting a phone call from a president of a college asking you this question. What are you doing to the students you're sending to us? They're amazing leaders. Well, that's what happened to Jenni Colwell. She's one of the top young lead trainers in all of Canada. And in this interview, she's going to share some of the best practices and some of the benefits of investing in a child's leadership potential. You're going to love it.
Welcome to another edition of Kid Lead Academy Training Series with Dr. Alan E. Nelson, designed to help parents develop their children to lead so they can succeed. And now, here's Alan.
Hey, I am very excited today to have as my guest Jenni Colwell. And I've known Jenni for quite a while because we met in the context of Kid Lead and developing young leaders. So she has a long history of developing young leaders, and I'm excited to tap into her experiences and learn from her as well and share that with you. She has been a teacher, school teacher, and then she transitioned her skills into the church, where she has been involved with ministry for over 15 years. She not only is an expert in working with kids, but her title officially is the Family Life Pastor of Christian Life Assembly, and that's in Langley, British Columbia. And she's also been married to Mark for almost 30 years. She has 4 kids of her own, and I just learned that as of this week, she's about to become a grandma for the first time. So she has a wonderful wealth of experience, not only professionally, but also personally. So thank you so much, Jenni, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Alan.
Hey, you've been doing this for a while, but if you can think back, you and your husband are both active in developing leaders and have been of all ages. But as you think back, what do you think sort of piqued that interest in you initially in developing kids as leaders?
Actually, I think for me, it's threefold. And the first thing that comes to my mind is that when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I felt like a little bit like I was floundering. I knew I was a leader, but no one actually named me a leader. And I wanted to do for others what I didn't feel like was done for me. I think I was about 36 years old when a boss of mine finally said to me, you know what, you're a leader. And God's going to use you, right? And so I think that was the first thing I wanted to do for others, what I felt like hadn't been done for me. And secondly, I have 4 kids of my own who all had leadership potential, all had leadership aptitude in their life. It was obvious to me even from a young age. And I wanted to do this for them. And actually, when I was looking into, when I first came back to work after my kids were small, I was looking into some sort of program. That's how I found you. I found an article that you wrote and on the 1013 window. And I actually, I cold called you, I remember. And from that, I started up doing Kid Lead, and 2 of my children were in my first group. And so I really wanted to do it for my own kids. And then also as a children's pastor, I absolutely wanted to invest in these kids who were leaving my ministry, going on to middle school. I wanted them to come back and to serve me in children's ministry. And I wanted to be able to train them to be effective and leaders in that area. So yeah, for me, it was threefold.
That's impressive. Wow, that's so impressive. And I related to your first story of kind of being this kid who was a leader, but for me, sometimes I get in trouble for being a leader, right? I was an instigator at school, and my dad was very authoritarian, and there was no room for leadership at home. So I think at midlife realized, man, I wish I had this kind of training. I think it would have set me up better for success long term. What are some of the qualities you see in kids that seem to have a leaning toward leadership? What are some of those characteristics?
Well, a lot of times in the room, it is the person that grabs the most attention, typically the class clown, those who take charge in the moment, who want to lead games. As a children's pastor, we're always doing these kind of activities, games, and people who want to be picked to do that, right? And then also people who you can tell, young people who other children follow them at a young age. they're kind of the leader of the pack, and their peers actually listen to them when they open their mouth, right? They actually, sometimes I just think, wow, this kid is taking charge in decision making, and it really comes easy to them. When there's a project, when there's an assignment, when there's a game, they're comfortable with making those decisions. And but also beyond this, the bossy, strong-willed class clown person who's a distraction to others, there's often really thoughtful, quiet leaders. And I think that through my year, about 12 years now of doing this, those are the ones that often really surprise me too. Some quiet leaders who, that something's going on and they're thinking. And then when they do open their mouth, you want to listen. For sure.
That's true. So you refer to the bossy kid, and I think we've all met that kid, or we were that kid, right? So talk to us, and not just as teachers or children's pastors, but as parents. What are some of the challenges we face developing these kids? And then also, what are some of the benefits you've seen over the years in their development? Challenges and benefits.
Okay, so challenges that, in doing this all these years that I've faced teaching kids and how to lead. First of all, when you do have the habitual leader, oftentimes the children that are the situational leaders in the room, the ones that they will lead, but they don't have to be the leader, it's intimidating. The habitual leader takes over. They just railroad, the scenario, the activity, whatever it is. And so getting those situational leaders to lead, and then also getting those habitual leaders to follow. I think that's been a big challenge. Some of the more practical challenges that I find that may have oftentimes to do with partnering with parents. I think lately, and especially coming out of COVID, kids' schedules have been a difficulty. We also have, an increase in the helicopter parent, where they're, a lot of times when I send that initial email to parents saying, "Oh, well, congratulations, your child has joined," and if they're going to be late, absent, I would love to hear from them. This is how they can communicate with me, and a lot of times I do have the parents that still, talk for their children, and so I try to get the parents, let your children lead, let the process actually happen, let them fail, in these moments too. So those are some of the challenges. Also, I feel like in the age of the screen, children are less likely to be actually in groups. They're less likely to be outside organizing, a hockey game or a soccer game, in the yard. And so they're often alone. And so they don't actually have as much time and, just opportunity to develop some of those leadership skills. And I think too, coming out of COVID, I have found the groups that I have taught out of COVID a little bit more anxious, more easily overwhelmed, less committed to the program, and less resilient in failure. And so that's why I actually think it's so important for us to keep this up, because we need to help these kids come out of this, because they do have leadership potential on their life, and it is, we need to draw that out of them. This is our, my goal, my mandate to do this. Like, you can do this. Name them the leader, right? And you asked about benefits. Oh, this could take a while, right? There's a lot. And like I said, initially in the beginning of our interview, was that I didn't feel like I was named a leader. And so I think the number one benefit I've seen is when you actually just invite that child into the program, into the process, and you say, "You're a leader." We actually, you've taught me, you trained me, Alan, to call them leaders. That's, we don't call them students, we don't call them kids, we call them leaders. That's how we address them. And when you name a child a leader, they actually tend to believe you, and they think, well, I should be leading something. I did a little math in my group. I had 19 kids in my group last semester, and 12 of them were serving with me in somewhere in the church. And so I thought that was, a pretty good number considering people's schedules. some of the other benefits, I just think it's just when you see that light bulb go off in their head, and when they actually understand a leadership principle, and they can point to examples in their life, and they can point to moments where people have failed them in their life, whether it's a character-based one or a competency-based one. Actually, one of my favorite light bulb moments, it almost always happens, is when I teach the lesson on honor, and that everyone deserves honor. They're like, no, they don't. And I'm like, actually, yes, they do. And when we have that conversation, it just blows their mind, right? So, yeah. And for me, I just think every time I walk through these modules, it reminds me as a leader, I relearn something. And I have this opportunity to be vulnerable with them and say, look, I'm still learning. I'm still in process as a leader. And, and sometimes I actually learn from them. So there's so many great benefits from this program. I'll tell that little story where I mentioned to you earlier. When I left my last church about 5.5 years ago, and I came out west to British Columbia, I was from Ontario. They needed to replace me as a children's pastor, and the young lady that they hired was in my very first Kid Lead group. She was a grade 7 student. She went on from Kid Lead, from 2 years with me in 4 modules. She went on to be trained by my colleague Holly, who did the Lead Well program. She went on to Bible college. The president of the Bible college called my boss and said, hey, we've got these 2 or 3 girls here at Bible college that their leadership ability is like head and shoulders over the rest, and we want to know why. And my boss said, call Jenni and Holly and ask them why, because
I love that. That's awesome.
The president actually called, so that's pretty impressive. And then she graduated from Bible college, and then after that, I left and came out west, and they hired her to be my replacement.
Wow.
I literally got to train my successor from grade 7 on. I think it blows my mind. That's such a great, it was such a beautiful thing to see for me.
That is impressive. I mean, you are firsthand testimony of this, but there was an organization a few years ago. I read a book, General Electric. They're a huge organization, and every year they have their own leadership institute, right? And they have dedicated campus to that. And GE, I don't know recently, but GE was one of the few organizations that never went outside to hire their leadership. They always hired from within because they trained their own leaders. Whereas a lot of organizations, they need someone who's really good at leading. So they have to go pluck a CEO or pluck some senior vice president from another organization. And I love that, that's big mega organization, but you're talking about even small organization, faith-based nonprofits, it works there. So that is way cool. And I want to go back even to the challenges you talked about, which I think for some parents, I think it's interesting. Some parents, those of us who are parents, know we have our kids, safety and outcome and well-being and top of mind. Mm-hmm. But sometimes we actually do a disservice. And you refer to the helicopter parent that I think most of us are familiar with, and I love that you push back on that. I remember teaching at the University of Southern California. This is a top 10 business school, right? Undergrad. And one of the students didn't like the grade I gave her. And so I said, well, I'd be happy to talk to you. So I did a Zoom meeting, and her parents popped in on Zoom. And I was sort of taken back, and I said, I'll have this conversation with your daughter, but probably not with you in the room, right? And my wife then, she runs a large senior living facility. And the other day, about 3-4 weeks ago, she had an employee who was not showing up for work, acting up. So she called her, and lo and behold, who comes into the room but her mother? So this is a gal who was, 19, 20, similar to my student. And it seems strange that even after adulthood, we've got parents who swoop in. So talk to me a little bit about, and you shared so many amazing things. And I love the story of raising your successor, but help us as parents understand how leaders need to be able to do things on their own. How do we find that balance between, giving them confidence and authority, and yet not just, letting them run to the middle of the street on their own? How do you find that balance?
That's a good question. And I think that, for, different parents, some of them absolutely let them fail. And then others don't. I think the conversation needs to be upfront with the parents. I think you have to explain to them the why. When you give them the why, listen, we're not trying to put your children under stress. They have to come and, speak with me when they're going to be away. But I think that giving them the why is going to be a big part of helping them to understand, okay, yeah, I got to back off. And then gently reminding them, hey, you know what? I know you said, I know you're just trying to, balance your kids' schedules, and you've got whatever 4 kids. And I understand you're just trying to give all the information that you need, but we really actually need them to step up and do this, because this is what we're doing. We're training your children to be leaders. We're training your children to be responsible. We have a whole 2 weeks on responsibility. And so if you can just help us out, and I've had to have those conversations with parents, and almost like every single time, I can't even think of an instance where they don't actually receive it well. So I think it's just a little reminder, sometimes when we're getting one of those students, they're typically the oldest child, right? And so parents they haven't quite let them leave the nest yet in those areas. And so they need a little coaching on that as well. And I think that's all it takes. It's a conversation. Oftentimes I do it by email, but then sometimes I have to have them in person, and they're always they receive it well and they understand. But the why is so important. The why is huge.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you do parent training, not just young leader training, and that's really what Kid Lead Academy is designed to do, is to take this training that you experience as a trainer and now help parents become their child's own trainers. So it makes a lot of sense that we just assume that if we're the parent, we know exactly what our child needs. And sometimes it's great having people like you to speak into their life. You mentioned another thing too about COVID, and I noticed that as well in my undergrad students, that the anxiety level has significantly gone up. I read studies. In fact, sometimes the universities will get together and they'll talk about that the kids post-COVID are sort of at a deficit, sometimes an attention deficit, sometimes an anxiety deficit or trust deficit. Talk a little bit more about that, and how could leadership development abate that or mitigate that?
Well, first of all, we put them in, we put them in groups, right? And having them in a group is refreshing. It's something that they, during COVID, there was so much isolation going on. And so having them together in a group and you can tell right off the bat, especially when they're first timers, you can tell that they're sometimes apprehensive. And oftentimes first timers are the youngest children in the group. And so there's all kinds of things, not just COVID, that's a factor here, but just reassuring them that, they're here for their growth, their development. And I think I'm a bit softer with them since coming out of COVID. I think I'm a bit like, okay. And oftentimes then I will have a conversation with the parent. Like, I noticed that they're really anxious in these settings, and even kids that were in the setting of Kid Lead ahead of COVID, and then during COVID, you could even see, well, they had to kind of relearn communication, jumping in and leading in these scenarios. And I think that we just have to continue to coach them along. I think we just, again, because of COVID, and I'm seeing this not just in the middle schoolers, I'm seeing this like right from the beginning, like these kids that were toddlers, trying to get back into programs. I think it's just going to take a little bit of time, and they're a little bit behind in their socialization. And I think that we have to be cognizant of that fact, and we have to keep encouraging them and giving them opportunity to lead. In a bit, I'm sure we'll talk about some projects later that we've done, but some of the projects that I used to do with kids and have them lead, I find that the kids aren't quite up to that level yet. And so I have to take a little bit more baby steps. And I think that's okay. Even kids that help me in kids' church, they're helpers. I've been trying to get their teacher, their adult, because there's always at least two people in a room. I'm trying to get them, hey, give them a little bit of the lesson. Just give them a little bit and say, you're going to lead the game. And just a little bit of baby steps going on there coming out of COVID. And then when they do fail, just about 3 weeks ago, I had a young lady who was really upset after a game. There was maybe some words that went on because they lost, how the emotions get high. And, parent even stepped in on that one. We had an absolute beautiful conversation coming out of it. And she was able to navigate that failure, navigate why she failed. And part of it was of a learning disability. And just the conversation, like just lean into those conversations. Don't let them fly by, take the time to lean in, figure out, all that's going on, and then encourage them to, overcome it.
I love that. That's so wise. And a lot of times we as parents, we like to fix it, right? We like to reduce our pain of the turmoil or the conflict or whatever it's going on. And I love your whole idea of leaning into it. Don't let these opportunities pass. We're going to come back to you. This is going to be a two-part podcast, and we're going to come back and ask you some of the projects that you actually do to train kids, and then some of the projects that the kids have actually done on their own. And you alluded to how it's kind of a little bit different post-COVID, but you did a lot of these amazing things pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. So I want to tap into that in a moment. So we'll come back in part 2. And Jenni, thank you so much for being our guest on this. And I hope people will check out part 2 of our conversation with Jenni Colwell.